The mail-order bride stared at the empty platform. The cowboy said, "You were meant to be found." Clara had never traveled far from her small hometown. Her life had been quiet, routine, and filled with small comforts. Her mother's warm kitchen, the familiar creak of the wooden floorboards, the soft murmur of neighbors greeting her in the morning. Yet despite the safety and familiarity, she had always felt a restless longing, a quiet whisper inside her that there was something more waiting beyond the horizon. When she first read the advertisement for a mail-order bride, it felt like a spark in the darkness, a fragile hope that perhaps her life could change in ways she could not yet imagine. Packing her belongings had taken days. Clara had not wanted to bring too much, fearing that excess baggage would only slow her down. She had selected carefully. A few dresses, sturdy shoes, a small collection of letters and mementos from her family, and a simple leather-bound journal where she had written her thoughts, hopes, and dreams. Each item she packed carried a memory, a connection to the life she was leaving behind. As she zipped up her suitcase for the final time, she took a deep breath and felt a shiver of excitement mingled with fear. This was the first time she would step into a world completely unknown, and it was terrifying. But it was also the first time in her life that she felt a sense of true possibility. Clara had sat by the window for hours, watching as the landscape changed from familiar fields to endless stretches of prairie. The sky was vast and open, painted with the soft colors of early morning, and for the first time she felt a strange sense of freedom. The towns and farms she passed looked distant and small, like snapshots from a life that had no claim on her anymore. She had met only a few passengers along the way, exchanging polite nods or brief conversation, but most seemed absorbed in their own journeys. Clara had welcomed the solitude. It gave her time to think, to imagine what her life might become and to prepare herself for the unknown. As the train slowed and hissed its way into the small station of the town, Clara's heart began to race. The platform looked quiet and nearly empty, with only a few workers unloading crates and preparing the station for the next journey. The town itself seemed small, almost frozen in time, with wooden buildings lining a dusty main street and a single church steeple rising in the distance. The air smelled faintly of hay, earth, and horses, a scent so different from the towns she had known before that it made her stomach twist with nervous anticipation. Clara stepped off the train, clutching her suitcase tightly. Her boots clicked on the wooden planks of the platform, and each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of the decision she had made was pressing down on her. She paused to take in her surroundings, unsure where to go first, feeling a wave of loneliness that made her heart ache. She had imagined this moment countless times in her mind. The arrival, the meeting, the first glimpse of the man she was meant to marry. But the reality was far more overwhelming than she had anticipated. The platform seemed endless and empty, the wind tugging at her hair and the hem of her dress, and for a moment she wondered if she had made a mistake. From across the street, hidden partially behind a wooden fence, a man watched her arrival. Daniel had grown up in this town, and his life had been shaped by the rhythms of the ranch he ran alone. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and strong from years of hard labor, but his face held a gentle expression that rarely went unnoticed by those who truly looked. He had been skeptical that anyone would respond to his advertisement. After all, who would choose a life in a remote town, far from the comforts and excitement of the larger world? Yet, as he saw Clara step off the train, he felt a flicker of hope ignite within him, a hope he had not allowed himself to feel in many years. Clara's eyes darted around the platform. She looked at the wooden benches, the distant hills, the line of wagons waiting to carry goods into town. She felt her hands trembling slightly, not from the chill of the morning air, but from the weight of the unknown. She had spent her life planning for safety, for predictability, yet here she was, in a place that demanded courage simply to stand and breathe. Her gaze wandered to the town beyond the tracks, small figures moving about, the faint sound of a horse trotting along the street, the clang of metal as someone hammered at a barn. Every sight and sound was new, each one reminding her that this was not a dream, this was real, and there was no turning back. Then, unexpectedly, she heard a voice. It was calm, firm, yet warm, cutting through the quiet of the station like a gentle wind. "You were meant to be found!" the man said. Clara's heart leaped into her throat. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting those of Daniel, who had stepped closer, his posture relaxed but attentive. He held no sign of arrogance or judgment, only a quiet confidence and kindness. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, the train, the platform, the empty town fading into the background. Those words, simple as they were, carried a weight she had not expected. They were not just words, they were a promise, a lifeline, an acknowledgement of her courage to arrive, to step into a life that could be frightening yet full of possibility. Daniel stepped forward, offering his hand to help her with the suitcase. His touch was steady, reassuring, and Clara felt a small wave of relief wash over her. The tension that had built during the journey, the fear of the unknown, the anxiety about whether she had made the right choice, all of it seemed to soften in the presence of someone who truly saw her, not as a stranger, but as someone who mattered. She allowed herself a small smile, tentative but genuine, and took his hand. The suitcase, heavy and awkward, seemed lighter in his grip, and for the first time since leaving home, Clara felt a flicker of hope. They began to walk toward the town together. Clara's steps still uncertain, Daniel's firm and reassuring. The town slowly came into fuller view. The general store, the blacksmith, the small inn where Clara would stay. The streets were quiet, and the few people they passed gave curious glances, some nodding politely, others whispering softly to one another. Clara noticed the simplicity and the rhythm of life here, different from anything she had known, but not unwelcoming. She realized that while this town was small and remote, it held a charm and honesty she had never experienced. The buildings were weathered but sturdy. The air smelled of fresh earth and animals, and the horizon stretched endlessly, full of promise. As they walked, Daniel spoke in short, careful sentences, introducing her to the basics of the town and what to expect at the inn. Clara listened intently, absorbing each word. She asked questions, mostly about the daily routines, the work on the ranch, and the local people. Daniel answered patiently, sometimes with a quiet chuckle when her curiosity led to unexpected questions, and Clara found herself relaxing bit by bit. The fear that had gripped her since arriving began to ebb, replaced by cautious excitement. She realized that this was not just a place she had been sent to. It was a place where she could begin again, where life could be shaped by courage, patience, and the willingness to embrace the unknown. By the time they reached the inn, the sun had climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. Clara checked in with the innkeeper, a kindly woman who welcomed her with a warm smile and a soft voice. The room was small but clean, with a simple bed, a wooden dresser, and a window overlooking the quiet street. Clara set down her suitcase, feeling the finality of this arrival. She had left home, crossed unknown miles, and stepped into a life she could not have imagined months before. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. Later that evening, as Clara sat by the window watching the town settle into a gentle quiet, she thought about the words Daniel had spoken on the platform. "You were meant to be found." She did not fully understand their meaning yet, but she felt their truth deep in her heart. It was not just about arriving in a place or meeting a person. It was about the journey she had taken to reach this moment, the courage it took to step into the unknown, and the realization that perhaps, for the first time in her life, she had truly been seen. And in that quiet, reflective moment, Clara made a promise to herself. She would face the days ahead with an open heart, with courage, and with the willingness to embrace whatever life in this small, remote town might offer. She did not yet know how her story would unfold, or whether the promise in Daniel's words would come to fruition, but she knew that she had taken the first, most important step. The train had brought her to this platform. The town had welcomed her cautiously, and the man who had watched from afar had spoken words that would echo in her heart forever. Clara was ready. The next morning, Clara woke to the soft sound of birds singing outside her window. The sunlight streamed in, warm and golden, casting a gentle glow across the small room. She stretched and took a deep breath, feeling the fresh, crisp air of the town fill her lungs. The quiet was different from home. It was calm, peaceful, and somehow alive at the same time. Clara had spent so long in the bustle of her small hometown, where neighbors stopped by to gossip, shopkeepers called out greetings, and children ran in the streets. Here, life moved slowly, carefully, as if it had time to think before every action. She liked that about it, even if it made her feel a little lonely. After a quick breakfast at the inn, a simple meal of fresh bread, butter, and hot tea, Clara stepped outside. The town was already waking up. A blacksmith hammered rhythmically at a horseshoe, sending small sparks into the morning air. A few townspeople walked purposefully down the dusty streets, exchanging nods and brief greetings with each other. The town felt like a living organism, where every person had a role, and every action mattered. Clara clutched her small satchel and walked slowly, taking it all in. She was determined to understand this place, to learn the rhythm of life here, and to find where she might fit. Daniel appeared as if from nowhere. He was mounted on a sturdy brown horse, his broad-brimmed hat shading his face from the sun. His presence was calm yet commanding, and Clara felt a flicker of reassurance at seeing him. He smiled softly, dismounting with ease, and approached her. "Good morning," he said. "Hope you slept well." Clara nodded, her nerves easing slightly. "I did. Thank you." She adjusted her satchel and hesitated, unsure how to start a conversation. I want to see the town, maybe learn a little about it." "I don't want to be in the way." Daniel shook his head, a small chuckle escaping his lips. "You won't be in the way. Come on. I'll show you around." They walked together down the main street, Daniel pointing out the small shops and houses, telling her who lived where and what they did. Clara listened carefully, asking questions about the town, the people, and the routines. Daniel answered patiently, sometimes in detail, sometimes with a quiet smile or a short laugh when her curiosity led to unexpected questions. Clara found herself enjoying his company more than she expected. There was something comforting in the way he spoke, something steady and reliable like the earth itself. As they walked past the general store, Clara noticed children playing near the edge of the street. Their laughter was bright and lively, carrying across the dusty road. She smiled, remembering the children from her hometown, and felt a pang of longing for the life she had left behind. Yet at the same time, she realized that these children, these small glimpses of life in a new place, made the town feel more alive and welcoming. She could imagine herself here, slowly becoming a part of this rhythm, even if it would take time and patience. Daniel led her to the stables next. The smell of hay and horses filled the air, strong but not unpleasant. Clara had never spent much time around animals, except for the occasional farm visit as a child. Here, the horses were calm, well-fed, and cared for, but they were also powerful and unpredictable. Daniel explained their routines, feeding, grooming, and training, and showed her how to handle the animals safely. Clara listened closely, eager to learn. She wanted to prove to herself that she could handle this life, that she could be strong and capable, even if it was unfamiliar. Her first attempts were clumsy. She fumbled with the harness, startled a horse by moving too quickly, and struggled to lift the heavy feed bags. Daniel remained patient, guiding her hands, correcting her stance, and offering encouragement without a hint of impatience. "It's okay," he said gently. "You'll get the hang of it. Everyone has to start somewhere." Clara felt a warmth in his voice, a reassurance that went deeper than words. For the first time, she realized that learning something new did not have to be humiliating. It could be empowering if someone believed in you. The morning passed quickly. Clara worked alongside Daniel, learning to groom the horses, feed them, and clean the stables. By noon, she was tired but felt a deep satisfaction. She had never expected such hard work to be so rewarding, nor had she imagined that she could feel so connected to animals she barely knew. Daniel watched her with a quiet pride, noticing her determination and courage. He had met many women before, some curious, some hesitant, but Clara was different. She faced every challenge with a mix of caution and bravery, and that impressed him more than he cared to admit. After lunch, they walked back into town. Clara noticed that people were watching her more now. There were whispers, curious glances, and sometimes polite nods. She realized that being new in a small town meant everyone would notice her, every action under scrutiny, every misstep observed. Yet instead of feeling intimidated, she felt a spark of determination. She wanted to prove herself, not to everyone but to herself, that she could belong here, that she could adapt and grow stronger in this new life. Daniel seemed to sense her thoughts. "Don't worry about them," he said quietly. People here are cautious, but they'll come around. Just be yourself." Clara nodded, appreciating his reassurance. There was something in his words that made her feel lighter, as if the weight of judgment and uncertainty could be set aside. She realized that while she had feared this new life, it also offered freedom. The freedom to grow, to learn, and to become someone stronger than she had been before. Over the next few days, Clara settled into a routine. She explored the town on her own at times, visited the small market, and began to recognize faces and names. She discovered a small bakery where the owner always saved her a warm roll in the morning, and a tiny library where she could sit and read quietly. Each day brought new challenges and small victories. She learned to carry water from the well, chop wood for the fireplace, and even mend simple clothing. Tears. Each task, no matter how small, gave her confidence and a sense of purpose. Daniel continued to check in on her, sometimes offering guidance, sometimes simply walking beside her as she learned the ropes. Their conversations grew longer, deeper, and more personal. Clara began to share small stories from her past, childhood memories, family traditions, and the dreams she had kept secret for so long. Daniel listened patiently, never interrupting, always attentive. In return, he shared glimpses of his own life, stories of the ranch, the challenges he had faced, and the quiet joys of solitude. Clara found comfort in his honesty. She realized that trust was slowly building between them, a trust born not from grand gestures or declarations, but from everyday moments of patience, kindness, and understanding. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with shades of pink and gold, Clara and Daniel walked toward the outskirts of the town. They stopped on a small hill overlooking the prairie. The wind was cool, rustling the tall grasses, and the horizon stretched endlessly, filled with possibilities. Clara felt a strange mixture of awe and peace. She had come here unsure of what she would find, uncertain of herself, and yet now, standing there, she felt a quiet hope take root. Daniel turned to her and smiled. "You're doing well," he said simply. "I can see it. You're stronger than you realize." Clara felt a warmth in her chest, a soft glow of reassurance. It was not just a compliment. It was the recognition of her courage, the acknowledgement that she had taken a step into the unknown and was learning to thrive there. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to imagine a future here. Not just surviving, but living fully, embracing this new life with all its challenges and joys. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be difficult days, hard work, and moments of doubt. Yet she also knew that she was not alone, that someone had seen her courage and offered support without judgment. That knowledge gave her strength she had never felt before. As night fell and the first stars appeared in the clear sky, Clara returned to the inn. She felt tired but fulfilled, a deep sense of accomplishment filling her. She wrote in her journal, capturing every detail of the day, the tasks she had completed, the conversations she had shared, and the small lessons she had learned. Writing became a way to process her experiences, a way to remind herself of her progress and the person she was becoming. By the end of the week, Clara began to feel less like a visitor and more like a part of the town. The initial uncertainty and fear that had gripped her upon arrival were gradually replaced by curiosity, determination, and a quiet excitement. She had faced the unknown and had not only survived but grown stronger in the process. And with Daniel's steady presence, she felt a budding sense of connection and trust that made the town feel less intimidating and more like a place where she could belong. She realized something important. Life in this small town was not about instant comfort or easy victories. It was about effort, patience, learning, and slowly discovering one's place in the world. And Clara was ready to face it all, one day at a time, with courage in her heart and hope in her eyes. Clara had been living in the town for several weeks now, and slowly the routines of ranch life were becoming familiar. She woke each morning before sunrise, the soft orange glow spilling across the horizon, and felt the crisp air fill her lungs. The days were long and tiring, but she began to discover a strength within herself she had never realized existed. She learned to handle the horses, to mend fences, and even to carry heavy buckets of water without losing her balance. Each task was difficult, sometimes exhausting, but with each small accomplishment, she felt a growing sense of pride. Daniel was always nearby, guiding her when needed but allowing her to try things on her own. He believed that true learning came from experience, not just instruction. One morning, as Clara struggled to lift a particularly heavy bale of hay, Daniel stepped forward. "Remember your stance," he said gently. "Keep your back straight, bend your knees, and lift with your legs. You can do this." Clara nodded, took a deep breath, and tried again. This time, she managed to lift it without straining herself, and a wide smile spread across her face. Daniel's nod of approval made her feel stronger than she ever had. The work on the ranch was not always easy, and Clara learned quickly that mistakes were part of the process. One afternoon, while repairing a section of fence, she accidentally dropped a hammer, startling one of the horses. The animal jumped back, snorting loudly, and Clara froze in fear. Daniel was there immediately, calming the horse with soft words and steady hands. "It's okay," he said. "Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is that you learn from them." Clara took a deep breath and tried again, this time completing the task successfully. She realized that fear did not have to hold her back. With patience and focus, she could overcome challenges. Despite the physical demands, Clara also faced emotional challenges. She missed her family and friends deeply, the familiar comfort of her old home tugging at her heart. Some evenings, after a long day on the ranch, she would sit quietly by the window of the inn, writing letters she didn't always send, pouring her thoughts into the pages of her journal. Writing became a way to process her feelings, to remember her past while learning to embrace her present. It reminded her that she had the courage to leave behind the familiar and step into the unknown. Daniel noticed her moments of quiet reflection. He did not pry but offered small gestures of support. A warm cup of tea, a gentle word, or a shared smile as they walked through the fields. Over time, Clara began to trust him more deeply. She realized that he was not just a guide or a teacher, but someone who genuinely cared about her well-being. In return, she offered her honesty, sharing small stories from her childhood and her hopes for the future. Daniel listened with patience, never interrupting, never judging, and in doing so, he helped Clara feel valued and seen. The townspeople, too, began to notice Clara's presence more clearly. At first, some had been skeptical of the new woman in town, curious and cautious about her arrival. But as days turned into weeks and as they saw her diligence and determination, their attitudes began to shift. The baker, who had always reserved a warm role for her, started to chat with her each morning, asking about her progress on the ranch. Children waved at her as she passed, and neighbors offered small words of encouragement. Clara realized that while she was still new, she was slowly becoming part of the town's fabric, welcomed not by obligation but by recognition of her effort and character. One day a sudden storm rolled in from the horizon, dark clouds covering the sky and the wind picking up with unexpected force. Clara and Daniel were outside finishing repairs on the barn before the rain began. The first drops fell heavily, soaking their clothes and turning the ground to mud. Clara's hands slipped as she carried a bucket of feed and she fell, the cold rain drenching her completely. For a moment she felt overwhelmed, wondering if she was strong enough for this life. Daniel was there instantly, helping her to her feet, brushing wet hair from her face.
"It's okay," he said softly. "You've done so well already."
"A little rain won't change that." Clara looked into his eyes and felt a wave of gratitude and trust. She realized that challenges, whether physical or emotional, were easier to face when someone believed in her. Together they finished the work, laughing softly at the absurdity of their soaked and muddy appearance. By the time the storm passed, the sky had cleared, leaving behind a rainbow stretching across the fields, a reminder that perseverance often leads to beauty. As the weeks passed, Clara began to feel more confident in her abilities. She could ride the horses with skill, manage the chores on the ranch, and even anticipate the needs of the animals. Her confidence extended beyond physical tasks. She began to participate more actively in conversations with Daniel and the townspeople, sharing her thoughts and opinions without hesitation. She realized that belonging was not just about fitting in, but about contributing and being recognized for one's efforts. Daniel noticed the changes in Clara. He admired her resilience, her willingness to learn, and her growing strength. Yet he also understood that trust and connection take time. He continued to offer guidance and support, always patient, never pushing too hard. Slowly their bond deepened, not through grand gestures or dramatic events, but through shared work, quiet moments, and mutual respect. Barda began to see Daniel not just as a helper or guide, but as a partner in life, someone who valued her not for what she could do, but for who she was. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, they sat together on a small hill overlooking the ranch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Clara leaned back on the soft grass, feeling exhausted but satisfied. Daniel sat beside her, quiet, letting her enjoy the moment. The peacefulness of the scene contrasted with the hard work of the day, reminding Clara that life was a balance of effort and rest, challenge and reward. "I never imagined life could be like this," Clara said softly. "Hard, yes, but also beautiful in its own way." Daniel nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "Life has its challenges," he said gently, "but it also has moments worth remembering. You're learning that, and you're growing stronger because of it." Clara smiled, feeling the truth of his words resonate deeply within her. Their conversations often turned to dreams and hopes. Clara shared her wish to create a home that felt warm and welcoming, not just for herself but for anyone who needed comfort and care. Daniel spoke of his desire to maintain the ranch, to preserve the land and the life he had built, and to share it with someone who could understand its value. In these exchanges, Clara felt a growing sense of partnership. She realized that life was not just about survival. It was about connection, trust, and building something meaningful together. The town itself became more familiar and welcoming. Clara knew where to find fresh vegetables, where to pick up supplies, and even which neighbors would offer a smile or helpful advice. She began to recognize faces in the market, to remember names, and to engage in small acts of kindness. A conversation with the baker, a smile at a passing child, a word of encouragement to someone struggling with chores. Each small interaction reinforced her sense of belonging. Despite the growing confidence, Clara still faced moments of doubt. Some days the work was harder than she expected, or the loneliness of being away from family weighed heavily on her. On those days, she would retreat to her journal, writing down her fears, her frustrations, and her hopes. She discovered that acknowledging her feelings made them easier to manage. Daniel never pressured her to be cheerful or strong all the time. He simply offered support and a listening ear, allowing her to find her own way through challenges. Through these shared experiences, Clara and Daniel developed a rhythm together. They worked side by side, learned from each other, and began to rely on one another's strengths. Their partnership was not built on words alone, but on actions, the silent understanding of shared responsibility, the quiet gestures of support, and the patience to allow growth at its own pace. Clara began to feel a sense of safety and trust that she had never known before, a feeling that strengthened her resolve to embrace this life fully. By the end of the season, Clara had changed in ways she could barely recognize herself. She had grown stronger, more confident, and more capable. She had learned to face physical challenges with determination, to navigate emotional struggles with resilience, and to build connections that were honest and meaningful. Daniel had been a steady presence through it all, not only guiding her but walking alongside her, offering support without taking control, letting her discover her own strength. One quiet evening, as they watched the sun set behind the hills, Clara reflected on her journey. She remembered the first day she had stepped onto the empty platform, nervous and uncertain, unsure of what awaited her. She had feared failure, loneliness, and regret. But now, standing on the same land, she realized that those fears had been met with courage, patience, and trust. She had found strength she never knew she had, and in Daniel, she had found a companion who saw her as she truly was. Clara understood that life on the ranch would continue to bring challenges, but she no longer feared them. She had learned that facing obstacles was part of growth, and that with support, patience, and determination, she could overcome anything. The bond she shared with Daniel was no longer tentative. It was a partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. Together, they had begun to build a life, not perfect, but real, meaningful, and full of promise. And as the night fell and stars filled the sky, Clara felt a quiet joy settle in her heart. She had survived her fears, adapted to her new life, and discovered a strength and connection that made every challenge worth facing. The ranch, the town, the people, and Daniel had all become part of her story, and she was ready to face whatever the future held, confident that together they could meet it with courage, hope, and trust. Winter had arrived at the small town and the ranch, coating the land in a soft layer of frost. The mornings were sharp and crisp, and Clara woke each day to the sound of her breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. Despite the cold, she no longer dreaded the mornings as she once had. She had learned to embrace the rhythm of ranch life, the steady work, and the satisfaction of seeing her efforts make a real difference. Clara dressed in layers, tied her hair back, and prepared herself for another day of chores, feeling stronger and more capable than ever before. The town, too, had grown familiar and welcoming. Clara now recognized nearly every face, and most people greeted her warmly. The baker saved her favorite roll every morning, and the shopkeeper called out her name when fresh supplies arrived. Children waved at her as she walked by, some even running ahead to show her small discoveries, like a bird's nest or an unusual stone. Clara felt a quiet joy at the growing connections she had made, realizing that she was no longer just an outsider. She had become part of this small, close-knit community not through obligation, but through her kindness, effort, and determination. Daniel and Clara worked closely together on the ranch, and over time their bond had deepened. They had learned to anticipate each other's actions, to communicate without words, and to rely on one another's strengths. Clara had grown confident in handling the horses, repairing fences, and completing the many tasks that a ranch demanded. Yet more importantly, she had learned to trust herself and her instincts, discovering a resilience and courage she had never known she possessed. Daniel, who had spent much of his life in solitude, found himself increasingly relying on Clara's presence, her insight, and her steadying influence. One cold morning, Daniel led Clara to the barn to check on the horses. Snow had begun to fall lightly, covering the ground in a soft white blanket. The horses, sensing the chill, moved closer together, and Clara carefully guided them to the stalls, ensuring each one was warm and fed. Daniel observed quietly, offering occasional guidance but mostly allowing her to take the lead. "You've come a long way," he said softly, his eyes reflecting a quiet pride. Clara smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. She knew she had earned that praise through hard work, persistence, and determination. As the day progressed, they continued their chores, moving with a rhythm that spoke of their growing partnership. They repaired fences, carried firewood, and tended to the smaller animals on the property. Clara noticed the beauty in the quiet work, the way sunlight glimmered on the snow, the soft sounds of horses moving in their stalls, the occasional bird hopping along the fence. Life on the ranch had taught her to notice the small details, to appreciate the moments that might otherwise go unnoticed, and to find satisfaction in effort and care. After a long day, they returned to the inn, exhausted but content. Clara lit the small fireplace in her room, warming her chilled hands, and poured herself a cup of hot tea. She reflected on how far she had come since stepping onto the platform weeks before. Back then, she had been uncertain, afraid, and hesitant. Now she felt capable, confident, and connected, not just to the ranch or Daniel, but to herself. She realized that the journey had been about more than learning a new way of life. It had been about discovering her own strength and resilience. Daniel entered quietly, carrying his own cup of tea. He smiled at Clara, a gentle expression that made her heart lift. "You've done well today," he said simply. Clara felt a warmth in her chest, a mixture of gratitude and happiness. "I couldn't have done it without your help," she replied. He shook his head slightly, smiling. "You've done this yourself. I've only been here to guide you when needed. The strength has always been yours." Clara nodded, understanding the truth in his words. Over the following weeks, Clara's confidence and skill continued to grow. She became proficient in riding the horses, managing the daily chores, and even anticipating challenges before they arose. The townspeople began to trust her judgment and relied on her more often, seeking advice or simply enjoying her company. Children ran to greet her, neighbors waved, and even the more skeptical townsfolk began to accept her as one of their own. Clara felt a deep sense of belonging, a feeling she had longed for but had never truly experienced until now. Daniel and Clara also spent more time together outside of work. They walked through the snowy fields, watched sunsets from the hills, and shared quiet evenings by the fire. Their conversations grew deeper, exploring dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. Clara learned about Daniel's childhood, his experiences on the ranch, and the challenges he had faced in life. Daniel, in turn, learned about Clara's past, her family, and the journey that had brought her here. Each story they shared strengthened their bond, creating a foundation of trust, respect, and understanding. One evening, as the snow fell softly around the town, Clara and Daniel stood together on the hill overlooking the ranch. The landscape was serene, the white snow stretching to the horizon, and the fading light of the sun casting a gentle glow over everything. Clara felt a profound sense of peace. She realized that she had not only adapted to this new life, but had embraced it fully, finding joy in work, connection, and the beauty of the natural world around her. Daniel turned to her, his expression soft and sincere.
"You've grown so much," he said. "I knew you had courage, but I didn't realize how strong you would become." Clara felt a warmth in her chest, a mixture of gratitude and affection. "I've learned from you," she replied, "and from the town, and from life here. I feel at home, in a way I never expected."
Their relationship, once tentative and uncertain, had blossomed into a partnership built on trust, respect, and care. Clara no longer saw Daniel as merely a guide or protector. She saw him as a companion, someone who valued her for who she was and who shared in her hopes and dreams. Daniel, too, recognized the depth of Clara's strength, intelligence, and kindness, and he felt a quiet happiness in knowing she had chosen to make this life her own. As winter continued, Clara found joy in small routines and simple pleasures. She helped prepare warm meals for the ranch hands, fed the animals, and even began to teach herself small skills in gardening and sewing, planning for the coming spring. Each day she discovered new ways to contribute, to grow, and to find satisfaction in her work. The town, once unfamiliar and intimidating, had become a place of comfort, community, and belonging. One evening, after a particularly cold day, Daniel and Clara returned from the barn to see the town lit with lanterns. Children played in the snow, neighbors chatted warmly, and the air was filled with laughter and joy. Clara felt a deep sense of contentment. She realized that she had not only found a home, but had become part of a community that valued her presence. The journey from uncertainty to belonging had been difficult, but it had also been transformative. Clara and Daniel spent that evening by the fire, sharing stories and quiet moments of laughter. Clara felt a sense of gratitude for the challenges she had faced, knowing they had helped her grow stronger, braver, and more capable. That to the turncoat! She also felt a profound connection to Daniel, recognizing the trust, respect, and care that had developed between them. She understood that this was more than companionship, it was a partnership built on shared effort, mutual support, and the quiet joy of facing life's challenges together. As the night deepened and the stars filled the sky, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered stepping onto the empty platform filled with uncertainty and fear, and the simple yet powerful words Daniel had spoken. "You were meant to be found." She now understood their meaning, not just as a promise of meeting someone, but as a recognition of courage, hope, and the journey toward belonging. She had been found not only by Daniel, but by a life she had chosen and embraced fully. Clara realized that true happiness was not about ease or comfort, but about courage, perseverance, and the willingness to grow. She had faced challenges, adapted to a new life, and discovered her own strength. She had built connections, earned trust, and found a sense of purpose. And through it all, she had formed a partnership with Daniel that was grounded in respect, love, and shared commitment. By the end of winter, Clara had fully embraced her life on the ranch and in the town. She no longer feared the unknown, nor did she feel the need to prove herself. She had discovered her place in the world, her strength, and the joy of connection. Daniel, too, had found someone who complemented his life, shared his values, and brought warmth, trust, and companionship into his world. Together, they faced the future with confidence, hope, and the quiet joy of knowing they had found something rare and meaningful. And as the first signs of spring began to appear, the soft thawing of snow, the first buds on trees, and the return of birdsong, Clara and Daniel stood together, looking out over the ranch. They had faced challenges, embraced change, and discovered trust and love. In that moment, Clara understood the fullness of the journey. The courage to step into the unknown, the patience to learn and grow, and the joy of being truly seen and valued. She had found her home, her strength, and her heart, and she knew that together they could meet anything the future held.